Shalom, this is Gene with Beit Bamidbar Messianic Outreach. Welcome to our Wednesday evening Bible study. Today we're beginning chapter 2 of the book of Galatians. Before we get started, though, I want to look at our bulletin for the week and talk about whatever is good or interesting, or just whatever is good. It's all right. Okay, let's get our smiling faces out of the way here. Okay, again, Beit Bamidbar Messianic Outreach. It's our phone number and our website. Feel free to check in. We have a whole bunch of stuff already up and running, and we're adding more every week. Um, and if you actually, you probably already know because that's how you log into this meeting. Okay, the date for the bulletin is set for this coming Shabbat. This is a Wednesday evening. Right now we're meeting, so if the date looks a little bit early, that's okay. Okay, we meet for Shabbat services at the Idaho State Veterans Home in Post Falls, Idaho. So y'all come on up. If you get started after this meeting, you'll be able to make it in time. Okay, we have of course, our Shabbat Shachrit prayer service, the morning service, and in the meeting we'll do our discussion of the weekly parsha. And the reading for this week is Shlach. Why am I having trouble reading that? Shlach lecha. Okay, send out for yourself. Okay, and we're going to be talking about the root word there, shalach or shaliach, in our Galatians portion. Okay, we have sort of a paleo-ish graphic of the word shalom, and of course, continually pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We definitely need this with all the stuff going on, and pray that God makes things work out for the best for His kingdom. With what's going on in the Middle East, everybody seems to be wanting to shoot each other rather than negotiate, which is not a good approach. Okay, next week's reading is Korach, which means bald. Let's see, maybe the speculation is he didn't have hair on his head when he was born. Thus, he was called Baldy. Okay. Our weekly meeting, of course, is if you're reading this right now, then you're on the weekly meeting. Wednesdays at 6:30. And you go through the website and click here to join. Upcoming events. Nothing's changed since last week, believe it or not. And that's primarily because during the summer, there's very little going on in the way of special events. And so for June, July, and into the beginning of August, we have no special holidays, no special gatherings that work on the religious calendar. So so you're free to spend the summer harvesting your vegetables and your crop, your grain, your wine, and your oil. You can bring your first fruits and your tithes to the sanctuary of God, or provide them to give them to your local Levite, or go down to the temple and give them to the priest, depending on what it is that you're actually bringing. So that's pretty much it. The rest of this is further on, and I won't bother you with those details until we get a little closer to it. Only to mention that it's all the way into end of September. We have Yom Teruah, which is Feast of Trumpets, the day of blasting, literally, and the Rosh Chodesh Tishrei up above that, the afternoon before. So, anyways, any questions, comments, rebukes on the bulletin before we move on? Okay, let's get back into here. Wrong thing. Bulletin. No, here we are. Galatians 2. Okay, here we are. Galatians chapter 2. And I don't know why that bar is sticking up there the way it is. Oh well. Okay, let's begin. There's a little shift in our discussion in this beginning part of the chapter. Shaul or Paul, depending on how you want to call him. Shaul is Hebrew, which means asked or requested, and Paul is the sort of a Greek sound-alike name. Paul interchangeably used them, and I interchangeably use them. Either one will work. This Shaul's approach would probably be, call me anything, but just don't call me late for supper, or something like that. Anyways, let's move on with chapter 2. Then after 14 years, again I went up to Jerusalem, this time with Barnabas, and I took him and I took with me Titus. Okay, Barnabas, a Hebrew, Barnabas, out of Strong's translates it as son of rest, but then calls for the root word Nevi, or prophet. So you would think that he would be the son of prophecy. The surname of Joseph, a Levite, a native of Cyprus. He was a distinguished teacher and companion and colleague of Paul. This is obviously somebody's commentary. Barnabas was among the original believers in Jerusalem, out of Acts 4:36 to 37. It appears at the beginning Barnabas was the senior of the pair, being the one to introduce Shaul to the other believers, as in Acts 9:27. And then we have another commentary on Barnabas. Took an early interest in Shaul, and accompanied him on the first of his 4 journeys, as shown in that. Okay. See also, those are there. You can pick up on those later. And also the other guy is Titus, okay, Titos, or nurse in Greek, a Gentile and Paul's companion in some of his journeys. Later a leader and recipient of one of Shaul's now famous letters. See Titus 1:5. For this reason, quoted here, this reason I left you in Crete, that you should set in order the things that are lacking and appoint elders in every city as I commanded you. So Paul's not wandering around aimlessly. He's got a process, he's got a goal, and he even trained up Titus and left him in Crete with basically the same instructions he gave to everybody else he went with. Okay. So that's basically self-explanatory. Verse 2, I went up in obedience to a revelation, and I explained to them the good news. This is talking about to Jerusalem, as I proclaim it among the Gentiles, but privately to the acknowledged leaders. I did this out of concern that my current or previous work might have been in vain. So it's interesting, after Shaul spending 11 years running around all over the region of Galatia, locating congregations, working within the congregation, drawing Gentiles into the congregation, teaching them they don't need to be Pharisees, but they do need to be obedient to God. After 14 years-ish, he decides to go to Jerusalem and confirm what he's doing is right. So I guess it was either the time was ripe to finally make this approach, or maybe he was finally tired of wondering. He just wanted to make sure that everything was kosher. So that gospel which I preach in his phrase there, okay, was this different from the good news taught by James, John, Peter, and everyone else? Stay tuned for our next episode. Okay, it took a little while to get around to answering that question, so I figured rather than keep you wondering, you know, if it's ever going to get there, yes, it will get there. We'll get to explaining that. But so he trying to verify that what he was teaching was kosher with everybody else, but he did it privately. Okay, this is wise, as a public first hearing may not allow for fairness and completeness, as some people will feel the need uh, to attack or defend without regard to the facts. I don't know if you've ever been in a controversial meeting where people just you have one thing in mind you want to accomplish, but other people in the room are dead set on not letting you accomplish that. So it's better to make sure that everything's right with the leadership. You know, you present your case to the leadership, and if everybody's okay with that, then you're good, and you can hang out and do what you normally do. But if there's problems, you need to work that out before you go public, um, and that's a very wise thing to do. Okay. Um, uh, Also, it is wise to confer and confirm if those bringing the false good news who are traveling from Jerusalem to Galatia are indeed sent by the Jerusalem Messianic congregation as formal shlachim or apostles, or if they are acting on their own. Okay, so if the resistance or arguments are coming from people from Jerusalem, um, potentially or allegedly coming with the office of being an apostle to that congregation sent by Jerusalem to deal with this Paul guy. Um, he wants to make sure, these guys that showed up, did you send them? Why? Um, was there a problem? Let's work this all out. So the idea is Paul's approach is wise because it allows for a private, casual or confidential sort of meeting where if there's problems, you can work them out without having to do it in public in front of everybody, because that's always going to take a lot more time and be a lot more difficult. So it was a very, very wise thing. Okay. So he went to the people of reputation rather than going straight to the leaders. And you see that before in our reading just a couple of weeks ago, where some Greek-speaking Jews from out of town came and they said, we wanted to see Yeshua. They talked to some of the apostles. They went to some of the disciples, went to some of the leading Talmidim, and they finally introduced them to Yeshua. That same idea is you don't go straight to the leader, but that was kind of seems to be the norm for approaching things rather than going straight to the leader directly. So Shaul worked his way up through the leadership until he finally got an introduction back to James and John and Peter. Okay. Okay. And then with the side comment, lest he be struggling in vain, lest you be doing this. After 14 years of working on his own, Shaul comes in to consult and confirm his work was indeed proper, coming in from the cold, as it were. Okay. Commentator says, I believe he wanted to honor the leadership of Jerusalem and assert with confidence that they were in agreement with his message for the Goyim. That being said, I think Paul also knew that he was going to face trouble from certain ones of the Pharisees, those following the strict rules of clean and unclean among the traditions of the elders, who did not agree with his teachings and his methodology concerning the goyim. Okay, now of course the goyim are the Gentiles. This is more of a technical term than it is um, a put down. It's sometimes used in Pharisaic or even Orthodox circles as a bit of a put down, but it's not. It just means people of the nations. Okay, and it doesn't necessarily have an intrinsic meaning of those filthy. Ugh, you know, that's not the point. Um, you know, so this commentator he's using the word correctly. Um, Talking about the people of the nations, and it's not supposed to be derogatory. Okay, and this is a very good thing that Shaul is doing is making sure that he's got his message straight and that he has agreement um, with those that who might disagree, have agreement with those who are in leadership from Jerusalem, who are basically the mothership of the Messianic movement. Okay, any questions, comments, rebukes at this point?
Oh, Rabbi,
Yeah,
uh, uh, this covering about the circumcision,
yes,
the followers of the what do you call it, circumcision,
yeah,
the movement, um, because especially coming from the Pharisees, they believe that those joining the faith, like the Goyim, the Gentiles, that they
hmm,
should be circumcised, right?
right,
And Apostle Paul is explaining that they are not bound to do that. They're not. I mean, it's not part of salvation thing
yeah,
anyway. But of course, the Lord would like to. Welcome them to the community, but they don't have to be bound by the Mosaic law, which is the circumcision.
yeah.
Am I right on that?
Partially. This is a nuanced argument. We have to be real careful that we have the correct argument and the correct terminology as we walk through this. And Paul's starting to lay out the groundwork in what's the difference between what the Pharisees are offering and what the Messianics are doing. Okay. And the nuance is basically this. We are okay in Acts 15. What did the Jerusalem council decide there? The Gentiles are welcome. The Goyim are welcome to come in to the synagogue and join in. Why? Because Moses is read in every synagogue and every Sabbath day, meaning they are going to learn God's lifestyle as they go. The difference between the Pharisee approach and modern Orthodox approach is they want you to do a full conversion into their version of the religious life prior to being accepted as a member. Okay, that is the major difference. Okay, but in including within that major explanation, it's not just the fact that they want you to learn Torah, but the Pharisees and the modern Orthodox want you to do their version of what they call Torah. Okay, and we get into that a little bit more in our reading today. There's a difference between God's written Torah and the Pharisees and Orthodox oral Torah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so to answer your question specifically, Gentiles are not required to follow the Torah, especially the oral Torah, but it's expected for them to learn the written Torah as they're there. Okay? So all the commandments that God says, you shall do this, start off to a Gentile who's new to the community saying, this is a good idea. Okay? So in a way, we soft pedal, we softly push the idea that Gentiles coming into the congregation need to learn how to walk in God's Torah, the written Torah that God gave to Moses. Um, but it's a learn as you go arrangement rather than you have to do this right now or else. And that's a nuanced difference between the Pharisees and the modern Orthodox is they want you to learn not just the written Torah, but all of the oral Torah and all the extra rules and regulations. And they want you doing that before they will accept you. They will tolerate your presence there as you're learning, but they won't accept you as a member. Within the Messianic community, we're told to bring people in and accept them and then let them learn as they go.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. That's the difference. That's the nuanced difference. Okay. So it's partially correct to say you can come in and you don't have to follow the commandments, but as an understanding that you're there to learn how to do them. In addition to loving God and, worshiping Messiah, we are expecting Gentiles to come in and learn and appreciate the commandments and learn to love doing them as we do. So yeah, there's a nuance and there is a timing issue. And the difficult thing about the timing issue is some people are a little more hard-headed than others. Some people might be a little less focused than others. And it might take some longer for one person to get the idea that God wants them to keep the Sabbath properly, or God wants them to be kosher, or God wants them to be, following the holy days. You know, it might take them longer to get the clue, but that's not our judgment. Okay, that's God dealing with them. We don't get to judge the level of their commitment. We don't get to judge whether or not they're not becoming kosher fast enough for us, and that's a nuanced difference. Okay. Okay. Any other questions, comments, rebukes? Okay, verse 3. But they didn't force my Gentile companion Titus to undergo Brit Milah. There's your answer. This inserted comment, verses 3 to 5, is another hint for the main discussion starting in chapter 3. Okay. Um, Titus was not compelled to be circumcised. Does this mean all Gentiles should not? How does this compare to Shemot Exodus 12:48 and Acts 21:25? And I quoted them here. If a foreigner staying with you wants to observe Adonai's Pesach, all his males must be circumcised. Then he may take part and observe it. He will be like a citizen of the land. No uncircumcised person is to eat it. That's a commandment right out of Torah. And the fun thing up here in Idaho, maybe not a fun thing, but is there are some congregations and organizations that specifically disinvite uncircumcised males to participate in the Passover service or activities of the of that local congregation. Some take that very, very, very seriously. Okay, and we have to acknowledge that this definitely is a commandment. Uh, the difficulty with enforcing this um, turns on the fact that none of us, even in Israel right now, do a proper kosher Pesach. How do we know that? Guesses?
There's no temple.
No temple. Okay. Even more basic at the time this commandment was given. What do you have present within Israel, within the people of Israel? You have a tabernacle, not even a temple. But there is a place where God puts himself, and there's a place where God tells us to make our sacrifices. So back then, yes, this could be very applicable. However, when we get to modern times where we have no temple standing, not even a mishkan of any kind, um, not even the most kosher Orthodox Jew can have a proper kosher Pesach because there's no proper place to kill the lamb. God said to do it at His place, and we have no place to do that. So, in the manner of the argument, especially on this one commandment, we don't have a capability of fulfilling this. Does that mean that no Passover anywhere is kosher because there's no place to sacrifice it? As far as the lamb is concerned, we can make the argument. However, the fact that we observe and do everything we can of Pesach is also a testimony that we are despite the deficiencies of reality, we are doing our best with what we have to follow it, and that's what we should be doing. So, the issue of whether or not you're circumcised is a moot point because there's no place to sacrifice the lamb that's kosher right now. So even with this argument, it's you can't observe it anyways. Okay, because what you're doing is you know everyone always talks about the Passover sacrifice, the Passover lamb, but it's not a proper sacrifice because we don't have the proper place to do it. So up here you have people that have their own altars where they sacrifice their own lamb for Pesach, and or they'll just do their own lamb. But we can never, even in the midst of the discussion and argument, we cannot, we cannot force that issue on anybody else because it's just what doesn't work. Okay.
Can I ask
The
a
other
question?
verse, however, in regard to the Goyim who have come to trust in Yeshua, we all joined in writing them a letter with our decision that they should abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, from blood, and from what is strangled, and from fornication. Okay, and this is after the decision of saying we're not going to force the Torah on the Goyim in Acts chapter 5, but rather get in there and get started. And that's the approach for the Goyim. Get in and get started. And for those who care, they may decide eventually that they do want to undergo Brit Milah, a circumcision, to belong to the group of people who follow after God, in a physical manner. But it's not like everything else that's a commandment. It's not deadly if you don't, but it's advisable if you do. Okay, it's a good thing if you do. Okay, the false brothers, such as in verses 4 and 5, wanted Titus to undergo the Brit Milah, which is the circumcision. But the leaders of the Jerusalem Messianic community, as in verses 6 to 10, didn't force him to do so. They believed, like Shaul, that it was unnecessary for Gentile followers of Yeshua to become Jews. And that might sound a little bit odd, but in the terminology of this discussion, it fits. They're not required to become physically Jewish. Okay, you can, and realistically, if you were not born Jewish, you're never going to be physically Jewish, even with the circumcision, because your DNA, your genetics don't change. Okay. Another commentary. Titus serves as a precedent, an act possessed of legal standing upon which future halacha, that is judicial rulings, may be built. Halacha simply means the walk or the way. It's a general category. It's a general term that covers all the rules and traditions built around how do you live a holy life before a holy God. So, and that's all covered in halacha. Out of Amos 3:3, how can two walk, halach, together without being in agreement. Okay. Okay. When interpreted in the context of Beit Shammai's the zealot tendencies, this dispute may be read as emphasizing the fact that the Gentile is unclean per se. Now, per se is a legal term. It says it doesn't matter what you say or do, the thing is what it is. It doesn't change. Okay. Per se is used in legal terminology. Um, for instance, if you broke a law, even just driving down the road too fast, you are guilty per se because it's demonstrable that you broke the speed limit. Okay, so the per se is there. You're guilty. That's it. No, you can't argue against that. Okay, and so in this discussion, then the Gentile is unclean per se. It doesn't matter what you do. You can mikvah every day. You can wash yourself with lye. You can make yourself clean with what you eat according to religious dictum from the Pharisees and from the Orthodox. Even if you eat kosher, you're still unclean. Even if you're scrupulously kosher by rabbinic dictum, you are still unclean per se. And there's nothing you can do to change it. Well, okay, there's one thing that they promote that you can do to change it. And that's why we have this letter to the Galatians. Okay, so the Gentile is guilty per se. He is forbidden to study Torah until he has been circumcised, since circumcision is not merely a commandment, but symbolizes entry into the covenant people. Now, that's a big statement right there. Okay, because the circumcision is the act which signifies the end of the process, near the end of the process. Oh, there's still one other thing to follow, but the circumcision is the next to last thing that you go through. Don't worry, we'll talk about it later on in the letter. What the last thing is. He is forbidden to study Torah until he has his circumcision. Those responsible for the dicta prohibiting Gentiles from studying Torah, such as in the Exodus Rabbah, which is a compilation of the words of the rabbis, also seem to have been those who insisted that they become full proselytes. And there's one of our big issues. Okay, that within and how does this work out in modern times is, you might like hanging out at an Orthodox synagogue, or you might want to visit once in a while. You might have friends that are Orthodox. They will tell you that it's nice that you're interested, but you're not going to be quite right until you go through the circumcision, or you go through the class and to become a full member. Only then will you be of stature that you can be acceptable. And that's a big emotional draw. Part of what we as Messianics have to deal with. It's a big emotional draw that somebody will say, well, we can help you become acceptable, but right now you're not acceptable. You have to do it our way. Then you can be acceptable. Because in Messianics, how many of us have caught grief and stress from friends and loved ones and family and coworkers or whatever, because you walk kosher, because you've changed from being a Gentile in your mentality to being a child of the living God, and the life changes that you made to walk in that change. Okay. The difficulty you have is everybody around you is saying you're nuts. Even in Messianic communities, especially if you're Gentile in Messianic communities, some communities will still differentiate you. So it says, it's okay that you're a Gentile, but you're not like one of us Jews. Just not equal. And two of the biggest organizations Um, in one, as a Gentile, you can only have a half vote status in the assembly there. And the other one is um, basically takes the statement of Jews rule, goys drool. Um, that you can come, you can certainly give us money to support us, but you're just not equal. Okay. And so what happens is if you're a Gentile, you want to belong. And if your local Messianic congregation says you don't belong, period, because you're really not 100% with us because you're a goy, up comes the Orthodox and says, we have a way to make you acceptable. And that's not, it's, this is a deception when they say that, by the way, but it's a deception that you're not quite right until you make the conversion to be one of us Orthodox, or back then a Pharisee. You're not quite right until you make that conversion. The downside is, even once you make the conversion, you're still not considered trustworthy among those that make you convert. So understand this clearly. If you're tempted to convert, you've got to understand that it doesn't fix the problem. Okay, they'll officially give you the piece of paper that you're part of the congregation, but they won't bring you in emotionally and socially completely because they're still not sure about you. Other people in the past have converted for other reasons. They want to get into the business model of working with Jewish people, um, or other reasons. But even you will not be, and this is part of the norm within Jewish communities. The convert, no. The kids, probably not. The grandkids, maybe, as far as being included and accepted into the community, because too much evil has been done by people, making the show of converting and then causing great problems later on. So from that point of view, it's a cultural defense mechanism. But from our point of view as Gentiles, it's an unfair advantage if you accept the idea that you must go through their conversion in order to be acceptable. And I know I'm working really hard on this, but we're back into the key issue of why the letter to the Galatians was written. Okay. Um, okay. Where was I? Stopped halfway through here. I'll start again at the beginning of this quote. Devarim, Deuteronomy 10:12-16. So now, Israel, all that Adonai your God asks from you is to fear Adonai your God, follow all his ways, love him and serve Adonai your God with all your heart and with all your being. To obey for your own good the mitzvot and regulation of Adonai, which I am giving you today. See the sky, the heaven, beyond the sky, the earth and everything on it all belong to Adonai your God. Only Adonai took enough pleasure in your ancestors to love them and choose their descendants after them, yourselves above all peoples, as he still does today. Therefore, circumcise the foreskin of your heart and don't be stiff-necked any longer. Okay. Here, commentator, the obvious message is that outward circumcision in the flesh of a Hebrew male does not automatically guarantee his place among the covenant people of Israel, the people divinely commanded to walk in obedience to the law. Okay. And that's a reality. It's one of those finger pointing things where there's three fingers pointing back at the Jewish person. If you're thinking yourself superior, or you have to make people to convert to your religion, the commandment is equally applicable. And when you get into the meat and potatoes of the oral law, you have a lot of legal arguments as to why you do not follow the written commandment of God. And So, if you study if you study the oral law, if you study the Talmud and stuff like that, you'll find plenty of discussions as to how to go about um, avoiding what God has said to do. It's not the sole purpose of the work, but it does come up enough. Okay, so um, in regards to Paul and his preaching partner Titus, the issue was this. Some regional religious authorities were more focused on the oral tradition of a proper circumcision according to Pharisaic custom, and then submission to Pharisaic authority to complete or make whole a ger's, a goyim's conversion. Okay, and this is actually a quote, a citation from um, the tractate Yevamot out of the Talmud, 47a and b. Okay, um, so that's the crux of the issue there. Um, and the only follow-up commentary is you will find, sadly, that you are not made whole and you are not improved by making conversion to Orthodox, or in the argument of their day, to becoming a Pharisee. Okay. Paul, not wishing to become coerced, not worship. Paul, not wishing to promote coerced circumcision by Pharisaic standards, believed in allowing the male convert to make his stand according to what the written Torah said, and always when he was ready. Very important, when he was ready. When he did enter circumcision, it was only as a sign of the written law, not service to the oral law. And as believers, we really, really, really need to focus on this. This is crucial to our understanding. Okay, we don't need Brit Milah. We don't need the circumcision to become part of the community, but we do need to obey the commandment when and or if you set yourself that you want to walk in God's ways completely, and understanding that this is according to the commandment that God gave us in the Bible, not that some rabbi or somebody religious says you have to do it just to be acceptable at all. Um, you know, you want to do it as obedience to God and for really no other reason. Okay. Questions, comments, rebukes. I know that's kind of a meaty issue.
Yeah, this seems like it's primarily towards the male. What about females that want to go through conversion?
There is no Brit Milah as far as women are concerned. Only men are
Right, yeah.
circumcised. So
But
that part of it, it's you still have to go through the same steps. You still have to take the class. You still have to go before the Bet Din, um, the court of the local congregation, and confirm that you are prepared and ready to follow all the rules and regulations. And if you are accepted by that Bet Din, then you still have to follow with the baptism, with the mikvahs, the three of them. And remember, it's the middle one that is the technically dicey one, because they look you right in the eye and says, "Do you reject any form of God you ever knew before?"
right.
Okay. Now, if you come as a believer in Yeshua, how are you going to answer that?
Hmm.
Okay. Are you going to reject Yeshua by saying yes? You know full well that if you say no, they're not going to go through with the mikvah and inviting you in the congregation. Um, so here's the big traumatic emotional moment that you have to either lie and say that you do reject all form of God that you knew before, and meaning only the local Pharisee or Orthodox version of what they preach as God. Um, you have to reject everything else, including your relationship with Yeshua.
Right.
They don't say it directly, but that's what they mean. And when it comes to interpreting words, again, this is part even of modern law. The intent of the words of a contract are just as important as the actual verbiage.
Mhm.
Um, and you can't really go back and rewrite a contract after it's been executed and mangled. But the idea is they know what they mean by that question.
Mhm.
Okay. You can justify in your own mind an answer that would satisfy what they're asking for, but isn't the truth of what they asked. And if you do that, then you've made deception. And so this is a very, very, very serious thing. And this is what in in the Messianic community we have to be very careful of how we deal with people who have made that conversion, and how and to sternly warn people to not go after that conversion. And the answer to the emotional pull is to remind people that in Messiah we are complete and whole, even as Gentiles. We have full promises from God all over. In fact, we added this into our weekly Shabbat prayer service, is Isaiah 56, where it says, "Even the Gentile who comes and participates in God's commandments and wants to be part of the family, even they are included, and their sacrifices will be acceptable to God." Um, and so that's what we preach as messianics, and we need to be careful that we teach that and um, not overstate the doctrines of the rabbis. A lot of times in the Messianic community, even the teachers get caught up too much, I think, in quoting the rabbis. And what
Mhm.
happens, you set up this notion that the rabbis are right, the rabbis are cool, the rabbis are smart, but it's those rabbis who tell you that Yeshua is not the one. And they sort
Mhm.
of overlook saying that. So, you can read the commentaries, the rabbinic commentaries, and you might get something nice out of it. Sometimes the commentaries help explain some things, but you have to understand that the ultimate acceptance of their commentary has to be cautioned by the fact that they don't embrace the Messiah. So you want to you can learn from what they say, but be careful that they aren't misdirecting you in the process. Okay, you can learn some things, and sometimes if you like to follow tradition, it helps to have an explanation as to why we're doing what we're doing in the tradition. Okay, and the good example, the good answer for that is we're following the traditions because it's part of the community that we are attached to, but we're not slaves to the doctrines that tell us Yeshua is not the Messiah, and we need to make sure we know that difference. Okay. Um, my commentary. But through false brothers sneaking in to secretly scope out our liberty. Uh, that's a quotation from Shaul's letter. Verse 5. To them we did not yield in submission. Okay. It's a remez. It's a hint to Tehillim or Psalms 37, 32, and 33, which I can see right now in my haste of updating the translation there. I did 33 and 34, so my apologies. But Adonai will not leave him in his power or let him be condemned when judged. Put your hope in Adonai, keep to his way, and he will raise you up to inherit the land. Well, I think what happened is the quotation is I think it's one of those where the Hebrew numbering system and the English numbering system are off by one in that spot. That sounds right, anyways. Okay, Shaul submits to examination or challenge by the elders and leadership in Jerusalem But resist the Phariseeism gets you in the family false brothers, as what he ran into in Galatia, okay, or what's going on around even in Jerusalem, amongst on the outside of or amongst the Pharisees. I mean, amongst the believers, the Meshichim and the Messianics. Okay, um, okay. The ones who were secretly brought in. Verse 4 appears to bounce back in time to the root problem. Root problems occurring in Galatia. Secretly, claiming to be authorized by Jerusalem, literally of James in the King James Version, but really not. Okay. So people coming out of Jerusalem, going into the congregations in Galatia, saying, "Oh, this Paul guy is not sent by us. You don't listen to him. You know, listen to what we say about the Pharisee way to do things." And that was part of the contention in Galatia. To spy out our liberty. What liberty? Okay, liberty is simply freedom to act. In this case, not free from Torah, but free to pursue Torah without the burden of being a Pharisee. Okay, so our liberty is we are free to follow the commandments of God. We are free also to apply if they make sense to us, but not to need to have to follow the Pharisee or modern Orthodox dictum as to how you go about doing this. For example, Sabbath is a big deal. We're commanded to keep the Sabbath. Okay. As a Gentile learning God's ways, it's very much in the groove for you to learn how to keep the Sabbath. But if you look at the rabbinic or the Pharisaic rules, there are piles of rules that you have to observe. Okay. For example, you have to have candles. And you have to light those candles 15 minutes before sundown. And you have to say certain blessings. There are prescribed prayers. The poor lady of the house has to work like a slave through Torah, through the whole Shabbat. She doesn't even get time off. Everybody else gets to rest, but she has to make 3 sumptuous meals with the best china, the best tablecloth, the best, the best of everything for each of these 3 meals during the course of the Shabbat. To the point where usually the woman of the house is so exhausted that she doesn't even make it to shul on Shabbat. She takes the few hours that she has in the afternoon of Shabbat to sleep, to rest, to nap, just to try to finish off the day. Those are the rules. If you want to become Orthodox, you got to follow those rules. That's Paul's comment a little bit later on in the next chapter. Okay, or later on. So if you want to become Orthodox, and that's the deal that Paul's telling you, is if you do that conversion process, you obligate yourself to do everything the Pharisees or the Orthodox tell you to do. You've obligated yourself by your word. Okay. Okay. So our liberty is to follow the commands of God, but not have to do it the way the Orthodox or the Pharisees say you have to do it. Okay. And that does allow for a little sloppiness if you insist on doing things your own way, regardless of what anything else is doing. And I know some people who do that. But it's you do have a freedom. You do have a freedom there, but it's not necessarily free to invent your own way. But as we get through this, the answer that I recommend is take the Orthodox habits as instructive but not mandatory. In other words, is it good to light candles at the beginning of the Sabbath or a little before? Actually, I find it is. It's not commanded. It's not something you have to do. If you don't want to do it, don't bother. Okay. But there's a psychological switch that goes on when you light the candles, because you make this physical action and say, work week is over. All work is over. Right at this moment, we are beginning Shabbat. We are beginning our rest. And it makes a nice psychological threshold to cross over. So for me, it's a useful tradition to incorporate in our family. Okay, let's go on here. What does make Shaul's message distinctive is his insistence that Gentiles do not have to become Jews in order to believe in Jesus. Today, the shoe is on the other foot. Messianic Jews are having to insist that a Jew need not become a goy in order to put his trust in Yeshua, the Jewish Messiah. This point irrelevant for Jews and therefore not part of the gospel as it was presented to them, is essential for Gentiles because it removes a major barrier, namely the requirement, in addition to trusting God and the good news, that Gentiles should leave one culture and join another. Shaul saw that not only that this was unnecessary, but that insistence on it was a grave danger to the truth of the good news. Circumcision quickly became the token of the entire controversy, precisely because when a Gentile allows himself to be circumcised, he obligates himself to obey the entire Torah, both written and oral, I should say. That is, he obligates himself to join the Jewish people as a Jew, to become fully Jewish. And that includes the entire culture of it. Okay. I would clarify to point out the terms of the conversion are set by the party offering the conversion. You cannot agree with their meaning in your promise to them at the same time reserve for your own personal meaning to those same words. In the terms of the Pharisees and modern Orthodox conversion, Torah is demanded to mean both written and oral Torah. Those who embrace Yeshua as Messiah cannot agree with the notion man-made doctrine equals God's written Torah, following Yeshua's own instructions. And this is my commentary on this point. Quoting Yeshua here. Early in the morning, all the head Kohanim and elders met to plan how to bring about Yeshua's death. Then they put him in chains, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate the governor. When Yehuda, who had betrayed him, saw that Yeshua had been condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 silver coins to the head Kohanim and elders, saying, I sinned in betraying an innocent man to death. What is that to us? They answered. That's your problem. Hurling the pieces of silver into the sanctuary, he left and went out and hanged himself. Sorry. The head Kohanim took the silver coins and said, it is prohibited for us to put into the temple treasury because it is blood money. So they decided to use it to buy the potter's field as a cemetery for foreigners. This all means that is, Shaul actually identifies with the Gentiles in this argument, although he was always frum, that is traditional in his personal practice. Take a look at Philippians 3, verses 4 to 6, Acts 23, verses 6 and 9, which I quoted here. Even though I certainly have grounds for putting confidence in such things, if anyone else thinks he has grounds for putting confidence in human qualifications, I have better grounds. Brit Milah on the 8th day, by birth belonging to the tribe of Israel, from the tribe of Benjamin, Hebrew speaker with Hebrew speaking parents. In regard to the Torah, Parush, that's the Hebrew for Pharisee. In regard to zeal, a persecutor of the Messianic community. In regard to the righteousness demanded by legalism, blameless. Okay. And then out of Acts 23:6, for knowing that one part of the Sanhedrin consisted of Tzaddukim, Sadducees, and the other Prushim, Shaul shouted, brothers, I myself am a Perush and the son of Prushim, and it is concerning the hope of the resurrection of the dead that I am being tried. So, in other words, he has an identification there. So there was a great roar. Some of the Torah teachers who were on the side of the Prushim standing up and joining in. We don't find anything wrong with this man. And if a spirit or an angel spoke to him, what of it? Okay. So that's part of the argument that Shaul used, that he's saying he's kosher. He's a Pharisee of Pharisees. But he's still embracing Yeshua, which does make some changes. Okay. Another parenthetical statement inside a parenthetical statement, if you find all that verbiage a little confusing, that they may bring us into bondage. In other words, the attempt to bring us into the bondage of their doctrines, not God's Torah, not God's commandments, but their version of it. Okay. What bondage? Funny idea. Let's talk about that. Not bondage to an oppressive Torah, but bondage to sin, even religiousness. Okay, now sin and religiousness can be used the same in this context. But bondage into religious tradition taught as God's commands, the Pharisees have delivered to the people a great many observances in succession from their fathers, which are not written in the law of Moses. And for that reason, it is that the Sadducees reject them and saw that they ought to esteem those observances to be obligatory, which are in the written aura, the written word, but are not to observe what was derived from the tradition of our fathers. This is a quote from Josephus, Antiquities, chapter 13. Interesting, because this is the crux of the argument between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and this is exactly what Yeshua was teaching, that we need to keep to the written commandments of God, but not to the oral discussions of the rabbis or the fathers. Okay. And again, they might be a good advisory. It might be useful information. Might be a good idea sometimes, but we're not to follow them as if they are written commandments. And that's one of the biggest differences that you're going to run into if you try to convert. If somebody wants you to convert, this is exactly what they're going to require of you. Okay. Okay. While learning and studying oral law, all converts to the Pharisee way of life and had to operate within the scope of a carefully supervised lifestyle requiring a mandatory probation period. During this time, they were taught that it was impossible to obey the divine laws without knowledge of both the written and the unwritten Torahs. Hence Hillel's words, no am haaretz is truly religious. Okay, am haaretz simply means a person of the land, people of the land, which is roughly equivalent to calling somebody a country bumpkin, an ignoramus, somebody who is ignorant and happy about it. That's the Pharisees' version, modern Orthodox version, even of anybody who hasn't made the conversion, is about as wise as an Am Haaretz. Okay. When a ger, literally sojourner, but often used as a goy in place of the word goy or goyim, took upon himself the rites of immersion and circumcision according to the Pharisaic custom, it was said of him, "You are now a ger ben brit, or covenant proselyte, as opposed to a mere ger toshav, a resident alien." Okay, so even after the conversion, they're still not considered fully Jewish, fully installed. Okay, so understand their argument. Even from their own point of view, they say that even somebody who is not Jewish who makes the conversion is still not considered fully Jewish. Okay, but rather, you know, um, a covenant proselyte rather than Jewish. So, so the question I would raise is, why would you try um, to do this if you know you're never going to be fully acceptable anyways to them? Okay. Shema, almost two full generations before Paul, taught that he would have nothing to do with anyone who was not prepared to give implicit assent before knowing its contents to the unwritten law. And that kind of reminds me of a politician who a few years back famously said about a bill that one of the finance bills, the budget bills, that she said you have to vote for it before you find out what's in it. You know, and that's exactly what the rabbis are saying. You have to fully accept it before you know anything about it. Okay. Shaul insisted the Phariseeism, circumcision gets you in the family, false brothers. Um, so he resisted that. So the good news would be in unblemished and prosper in Galatia. In other words, people need to be, in this little graphic is just for giggles, need to be aware that you are available to follow the commandments of God, but you don't need the instructions of the Pharisees or the Orthodox to tell you how to do it. And it's you can learn this, you can do it right, even just following what the commandment says. Okay. That's the end of our section. There's quite a mouthful, quite a lot to chew on. Any questions, comments, or rebukes?
Okay.
Okay. No takers?
Mm. I was just going to say, I don't know, this popped in my head. What about because I know I was approached many years ago, by some Orthodox Jews that they knew that I was Messianic, and I told them that I was Jewish. I'm fully Jewish, but then they're telling me that you have to go. I had to go to their congregation, to their synagogue, and reconvert. So I guess it's the same thing. It'd be the same principle where you have to denounce the Lord, and that's the whole idea of them, having you go in there.
Yeah, and they're very conscientious to not make a big deal out of it until you're right at that very last moment after 1 year or 2 years, depending on the congregation, of going to classes and go through this whole ceremony, and you're in your second of three mikvaot, and then they finally challenge you with, you reject God in any form that you knew before.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to decide, we're either going to lie to their faces or you're going to throw away Yeshua. Realistically, for a lot of people that convert, they've already, because you're going through their classes, you've already been distracted from Yeshua. You've already been, in order to make it through their classes, you're going to basically have to say, I'll go with what they say. And everybody I talk to who's made the conversion always come out of it with the final statement, I don't know anything about this Jesus guy.
Mm.
But him I don't know anything about. you know. So even in talking to me face to face, they openly acknowledge that they've completely pushed away any acceptance or knowledge of Yeshua.
Wow, that's sad.
So and so it's a very strong, it's a very difficult thing to consider. But this is what's going on in Galatia at the time, and it's going on in our congregations everywhere we meet in our Messianic congregations.
Mhm.
Because someone will come along and say, well, you're not kosher enough, you're not right enough, you're not good enough, you got to follow our way. And they won't really make it a point for you. They'll just let you learn as you go until you get to that point where you have to throw away 2 years of study with them, or stand up and acknowledge that you belong to Yeshua, and that's that.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
sad.
Any other questions, comments, rebukes? Okay. Father, thank you for bringing us together. I know this was a very chewy discussion today, so I just hope and pray that anybody who listens to this later on, and even the people that are here with us, um, will come to a firm understanding and a firm knowledge and a firm confidence, that we hold the truth, that we hold the right doctrine, that we hold the right reasons because we follow what God has said in His Torah, His written Torah. And in embracing Yeshua is part of that. It's not a new thing, it's not a strange thing, but it's all part and parcel of what was given to us in the first 5 books. And give us that confidence so that we won't be shamed or confused into following a wrong path. Be with us, Lord. Keep us full of your Spirit. Teach us and guide us and direct us in all those things, that we will have joy and satisfaction and contentment, even in the face of opposition. Keep us all safe and bring us all back again next week. Thank you very much, Lord. B'Shem Yeshua. Shalom.
Shalom and amen. Thank you, Rabbi Jean.
Thank you, Rabbi Jean.
Shalom, kids.
Thank you,
See you next week,
everyone.
God willing.
Okay. See you.
Say hello to Ellen and the family.
Yes.
Sure thing.
Yeah.
All right, shalom.
Okay. Bye, Sister
Shalom.
Sharon.
Shalom.